and also part of the member focus group. Member focus group actually works under GTEC, and some of our main focus areas are membership development, member benefits, grievance redressal, and other things which are useful for the member community. So one of the requests that we have been having from the community is to have some of the consultants with whom the member companies have been working with in various areas like legal, HR, finance, etc., and to see if they can share their expertise with the wider community, and also if the community wants to use services of such consultants, whether we can share their information across. So we are working towards that. What we're planning to do is to have such interaction sessions with consultants who are very useful to our industry, and then eventually we will also be publishing information about some of the consultants which our member community recommends. So that is the eventual plan. So as part of this series, there are multiple sessions which will be coming up after this as well. So for today, we have Advocate Asha Esther Umen from Omega Alliance. She actually specializes in contract and labor laws. She has over 12 years of experience in the industry, and she is also an accredited member of the Indian Institute of Arbitration and Mediation. I think there are also other questions which we have received, which we have also shared with Asha. And like Vishnu said, there's going to be a session, and then after the session, probably she'll be answering some of the questions that were asked by the community. And in the during the session, if you have any questions, again, please post in the chat box, and I think we'll take up as many questions as we can. So with that, I would like to thank Asha for volunteering to do this. And Asha, over to you.
Thank you, Harish, and thank you for the opportunity to present uh, before this association. I consider myself privileged. So, before I begin, I'll just share my screen. Vishnu, you're able to see my screen?
I think it's coming up.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Harish. So,
It says it started screen sharing. Maybe I think you should select the entire screen instead of, it's because it's showing a black screen for now.
I'll just do it.
Yeah, we can see now. Yes.
So, before I begin, a very brief introduction about me.
Asha, 1 second.
Yeah.
The presentation, have you opened it, or we just
Yeah,
seeing
I've
the,
opened it. It's on slide 2 now.
no,
About me.
no, we see the folder alone. Um, So when you click on share, there are two options. One is the entire screen, and the other one is a specific window. I think you have selected a specific window, so that's why it's showing only that folder view.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see now. Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
maybe you can do the slideshow mode itself.
Yeah. Thank you for bearing with me. Now I'm addressing a group of
No, no, no worries, no worries.
techies, and I'm somebody who ran away from science. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's not slideshow yet, by the way.
okay.
Is it going to just click from the beginning? Is it going to a different window?
Yeah, it's going to probably I'll have to.
Yeah, I
How
think
about now?
no, it's not. Yeah, we can see, but I think it's a bit weird. I think there is. I think the notes are also shown. Do you have speaker notes?
No, I
No,
don't
no,
have
that
speaker.
is the next screen. In the Microsoft PowerPoint, you have an option to see the next screen also. So I
Okay.
think that is shown. It's okay. I think we can start now. Let the next screen also be there on the side. No problem.
Okay, fine. Yeah, Asha, please proceed.
Okay. So before I begin, I'll just briefly introduce myself. I did my schooling here from Cochin Kendriya Vidyalaya. Then I moved over to Bangalore, completed my BCom there, and then went on to Delhi to do my law degree from Delhi University. In 2008, I joined Clifford Chance Business Services. I was with them for about 4 years. While with them, I also got the opportunity to work out of their UAE offices. That was actually laid my foundation in the legal world. Following that, in 2012, I joined Moody Shared Services. And in Moody Shared Services, my role was a mix of being involved with the business as well as the legal side. So I was in the procurement and operations, and I was leading their, I was their global lead for contract management. 2018, I moved back to Cochin and I joined Omega Alliance. So Omega Alliance is basically a law firm based out of Cochin. Main areas of specialization are corporate and taxation laws. So I also hold an advisory role as the external member on POSH committees that companies have to mandatory have. So that's very briefly about me. Okay, so now an introduction to the session. The topics that I will be covering in this session are confidentiality, intellectual property rights, limitation of liability. So I do have a tendency to speak fast. So if you think that I should slow down, please take the freedom and tell me to slow down. Okay, so that so moving on. So this brings us to the question that all of us have in our mind: intellectual property rights, confidentiality, and limitation of liability clauses. Now, are these a lawyer's fetish or an engineer's aversion? Are you agreeing to restrictions to more than what is actually required? Are your interests and rights protected? Are your risks proportionate to your fees? Now, I plan to address these three aspects by looking at it. One, what is the purpose and objective of having such a clause in the contract? From the customer's perspective, what when they have a confidentiality clause or an intellectual property right clause or a limitation of liability clause, what are their expectations or what is their perspective? And then the supplier and service provider's perspective. And I'll conclude with a few negotiation tips that know, or rather points to keep in mind while so that could have harmonized both the customer's perspective as well as the suppliers or the service providers perspective. Now, before we go into each of these clauses, a couple of assumptions I have made from my side is that I'll be covering only IT services agreement. Like, for example, software contracts are in different forms. You do have a licensing agreement, you have a software development agreement, SaaS agreement. So this is limited to the scope of a IT services agreement. And I'm also won't be specifically dealing with handling and processing of any personal data, because that itself is a very vast and a detailed subject. And I'm also working on the assumption that majority of my audience today are service providers or suppliers. Now, before we go into each clause individually, just a brief outline as to what a pro customer agreement looks like. So most often we end up signing a customer's template. So the objective in the customer's mind behind their contracts are they want to protect themselves, and they extend that protection by seeking how well we can or to what great extent we can extend the service provider's obligations and liability, and how can we maximize the extent of losses that if ever we incur into, how much we can recover. So dealing into the first topic of our for today, the confidentiality clause in our contracts. Now, the purpose of having a confidentiality clause in a contract, generally it aims to cover some or all of the following types of information. Information about a party's business and affairs, technical information, for example, processing know-how, concepts, ideas, samples, prototypes, and then information developed by the parties during their course of their contractual relationship, which could either contain information which is inspired by information disclosed to one another during the contractual period. The other objective is to place a general obligation on the recipient of confidential information to respect the confidentiality of the information supplied. The third would be that the confidential information that is provided is used specifically for the purpose which has been agreed. And next would be to create an obligation on the recipient of confidential information, and that this clause, confidentiality clause, should survive the termination of a contract. So this is in brief the objective or a purpose what the confidentiality clause aims to cover. Now, from a customer's perspective, for them, for a customer, it works in their favor to have a wide definition of confidential information. They would also want to impose restrictions on the supplier to limit the number of authorized personnel accessing the confidential information. The service provider would have to make representations that they have put in place all steps to ensure the confidential information won't be accessed and distributed in violation of agreed terms. And even if there is no, and it would be distributed to people on a need to know basis. They also would want to restrict third party disclosure. They want to be informed about mandatory disclosures, and in case there is a failure to comply, they would expressly want the an indemnity to cover such a breach, and also to have a clause that would take care of the losses they would incur. Now, when I say permitted disclosures, they would want to lay down circumstances in under which a supplier might disclose their information. And this will be entirely if it is required by law, either if there is an order of a court, or the regulator requests for the information, or the government asks for it. So in such an event or a scenario, the customer would want that the supplier, if permitted by law, give them sufficient notice that they can go and appeal this requirement before the necessary authority. Now, from a service provider's perspective, they would like a service provider would, or a supplier would expressly want exclusions to be specified. Now, the following exclusions that they would want is information that is generally available in the public domain, information that the supplier already had on a non-confidential basis, information that the supplier got from a third person who was not bound under any confidentiality obligation, and the supplier had no knowledge of no, the third party being that had was not under a confidentiality obligation. And the next would be the parties agree in writing that the information given is not confidential and can be disclosed. The information is developed by or the recipient independently without relying on any of the information provided by the customer. They also will want this duty of confidentiality to be mutual. Although when you weigh both the information shared by both the customer and the supplier, there is a tendency to think that my information is not as much as important as the other party. But at the end of the day, it works in both parties' benefits that a confidentiality obligation be mutual. So now that we know what a customer is looking for in a confidentiality clause and what a service provider or a supplier's perspective, a few negotiation points that you can keep in mind. One, generally confidentiality clauses are of concern, but it's not a driving issue. Customers are not comfortable amending their definition of confidential information. So that this is something that you will even come across even in while signing NDAs. Mm, you like they are not the customers are not comfortable amending that definition. So try as far as possible to leave that as it is, and then when it comes to the subsequent clauses, that's when you can bring in your like I mentioned earlier, seek to put in place a mutual confidentiality obligation. However little confidential information that you are sharing, still it's good to have that covered. And most often customers in their contracts would insist on return of confidential information. But realistically speaking, in today's scenario, returning confidential information may not always be a feasible option. So look at options to expand to include destruction of confidential information, and the choice whether to return or to destroy be at the with the service provider. Also make it a point to exclude your data that would have got backed up as part of your data retention and data backup policy. So in that case, the customer might come back and ask you for a declaration saying then you would not purposefully go and retrieve that data. So these are a few negotiation points you can keep in mind when negotiating on the confidentiality clause. Moving on to the next topic for today is intellectual property rights. Now, before we go into detail, just very briefly, what is intellectual property? Intellectual property is is in not to put it very simply, it's a creation of the mind which has both moral and commercial value. For example, inventions, literary and artistic works, symbols, names and images used in commerce. So that would be your logos, etc. Now, what is an intellectual property right? Intellectual property right is like any property right. It allows the inventor or the owner of patents, trademark, or copyrighted works to benefit from their own work or investment in creation. Now, why do we need intellectual property protection? The primary purpose behind IP protection is intended to stimulate creativity of the human mind for the benefit of all by ensuring that the advantages derived from them are specifically benefits the creator. Now, to list a few, the different types of IPR are patents, trademarks, copyrights, industrial designs, trade secrets, geographical in indication. Now, an IPR clause in a software contract. What is the purpose and objective served? Now, the purpose of having an IPR clause in a contract is where customers are providing the service provider with materials in which there is already a subsisting IPR. And then this, where a service provider is providing deliverables in which there is already a subsisting IPR. So this could include your instructions on software, or the service provider, or a third, or you could be relying on a third party material, or materials that are previously developed and that which you're using for this new software development. Now, another objective is to lay down the duration for which these IPRs can be used. The service provider may either provide the materials for the customer to use solely for the duration of the services, or in this case, then the supplier would just provide them with a license, or might permit the customer to use the materials even after the services have stopped. This could go beyond the term of the contract. So this could either be by giving a lifelong license, or the customer might ask for an assignment, or it could be a combination of both. Now, from a customer's perspective, when they look at an IPR clause, they would want the clause to define IPR as wide as possible. And they would want to include patents. So the definition would generally include patents, utility models, right to inventions, copyright, related rights, moral rights. Moral rights are basically the rights of the creator. Trademarks, service marks, business names, domain names, goodwill, right to sue for passing off, rights in design, rights in computer software, database rights, right to use and protect the confidential information, etc. So that this would even include your know-how and trade secrets. So they would want the IPR's ownership to be transferred to them without any preconditions. No, they want outright ownership of the IPRs. Also, with regard to the indemnity on IPR, they want an uncapped indemnity in respect of third-party infringement claims. Now, from a service provider's perspective, as a service provider, I would want to keep, I have created the products, I consider it my birthright, and I would want to retain it. I want IPRs to be defined, and also if there is a breach by the customer, I would want to have the ability to exit and terminate the contract. Now, points to keep in mind, again, IPR clauses are negotiated. It often, it can be a pain point where it can break or make contracts. So one thing one has to be clear is whether you should have a clear idea of what you want to achieve. Whether you want to give the license only for the duration of the contract, that is as a supplier, I'm merely giving the customer a license to use any materials that it is providing to the customer for the duration of the contract, or maybe a combination of a perpetual license and an assignment of service. So this combination comes into play, especially if you're using a third party IPR or a pre-existing IPR. In that case, you are not in a position to assign the entire IPR to the customer. And the third aspect is the assignment of all of the IPRs. A customer may insist on assignment of all of the IPRs in the deliverables. This might be part of this would come into place, especially if you're developing customized software. So another possibility for you to look at is maybe accept a clause on the basis that you're not anticipating that this specific customized software, you don't expect it to be reused in the future. Now, moving on to the next topic, which is limitation of liability. think this is something like in my experience over here, like in my previously, I think by nature we are of the view that no, we our risk appetite is quite high. So it's not all contracts that are going to. So if you which turns sour. So if you sign 100 contracts, it's probably one in that 100 that will turn sour. But that's enough to cost you the profits that you've earned from 99, the previous 99 good contracts. So that's where, from a supplier's point of view, limitation of liability is a key clause. For a customer, if a limitation of liability is not there, it works in their favor, because then the amount of damages that they can claim for a breach is undefined. No? So that's open ended for them. So the purpose of having a limitation of liability clause. Now, like I said, every commercial transaction carries a risk of liability. Performance can bring the parties into contact with each other. There's your staff, the subcontractors, the suppliers, the customers, associates, visitors. In ways it could give rise to all kinds of legal liability for either breach of contract or negligence or infringements of rights or misrepresentation, breach of your statutory duties, regulatory offenses, defamation, and so on and so forth. So liability can be incurred either with fault or without fault through the acts of others. A limitation of liability cause reduces one major risk, the risk of claim by a counterparty. In the absence of a limitation of liability clause, there is no financial limit on the damages a counterparty can recover. A party, ideally, it's in the supplier's interest to reduce its exposure, and to which you need an express limitation of liability. Now, while we are on limitation of liability, a connected topic is indemnity. Like you would have this specifically, you would have a IPR indemnity that's tied into your IPR clause, or you could also have an indemnity tied into your confidentiality clause also. So briefly, what an indemnity is an express obligation to compensate by making a money payment for some defined loss or damage. This is different from a warranty. Warranty is basically a contractual promise that if I breach something, no, it gives rise to a right or a right to sue for damages or for breach of contract. Now, what is a customer's perspective when they see in a limitation of liability clause? One, the customer should be able to claim for all losses it suffers. So when I say all losses, it would mean consequential losses, loss of profit, the cost of proceedings. So that could include even your legal fees, and like some of it would also go, like if they had to bring in a replacement, that cost, etc. So the loss incurred this clause should also include a loss incurred as a result of one, an alleged or an actual infringement of any third party IPRs or other rights. Then any claim that is made against the customer, but for any liability, loss, damage, injury, or cost or expense that a customer would sustain, or its employees or agents would sustain on account of using the deliverables which have been provided to the customer. Or it could also give rise to indirect breach or negligent performance on account of or failure of duty on account of the supplier. Now, if there is a monetary cap, they would want that cap to be applicable throughout the life of the contract. And they would also want to ensure that the cap that is in place is not to the disadvantage of the customer. Now, from a service provider's perspective, it is, they want to be clear about what loss and to what extent of loss which will be covered. They also want, like, if there is a third party claim, a supplier would want to have control over the third party claim, for which they would want no specific procedure. For example, if there is a third party claim brought on account of a use of one of the deliverables you have provided, they would want the customer to, as to notify the supplier as soon as possible, like, even lay down the notification period. And they will also want then to the ability to take over third party claims and not have the customer run the third party claims. They'll also want to cap the indemnity of what a supplier would have to incur in such an instance. So now points that one can keep in mind. So in fact, this is there are 5 slides to this. So I've tried to break this down into different parts. Uh, So like like I mentioned when I started this is a heavily negotiated and is a cause of concern also. And I would be wrong to say that no, okay, this limitation of liability clause can be used throughout. This at the end of the day, each you could have a broad structure, but it needs to be tailored to your particular transaction. It's very important um, to bear in mind, your governing law and the jurisdiction that you're under while tailoring this limitation of liability clause. You also need to review your agreement to assess whether an appropriate selection of clauses to be excluded has been made, and any necessary amendments, if required, that needs to be made. It's important for you to identify your risks. So how do you go about identifying your risks? So again, I've put down questions that you need to ask yourself. What could realistically go wrong? How much would it cost if something went wrong? What is the likelihood for it to happen? If How will you deal with the risk if it arises? Do you have the knowledge and the resources to handle it? Is this risk acceptable for this deal? Now, common risks that a party as a supplier that you need to consider is insolvency of a party, change of control, breach of contract. You've got your economic risk. Then, especially when we deal with outsourcing of contracts, there are the regulatory and compliance risk. Then there's also a non-contractual liability to the counterparty. There are taxation risks also. So they are just in brief risks that you might come across. Now, how do I go? So the next would be to consider ways to minimize the risk. So there are commercial solutions, like I can put in place a quality control. So quality control would be review customer feedback. Why not during the contract, like when you send across work for the customer's feedback, review feedback, update your product procedures, customer service to improve customer satisfaction. Use notices and disclaimers wherever possible. This could be on your products, in your marketing material, to reduce the risk of liability to non-parties. Then your product documentation, review your product descriptions and instructions for use. Do they raise a risk of liability to non-parties? Could that risk be reduced by a notice or disclaimer? Compliance. If you have identified a risk that performance of the contract may run into regulatory and tax problems, for example, consider dealing with them directly, either with a relevant authority to reduce their risk. Review internal procedures to improve your compliance. Especially when you deal with for like either a US counterparty or a common law jurisdiction, you do find customers insist on an insurance. So consider what insurance is available, what risk those insurance will cover. It might also require you to what you say, change your payment terms. So that could involve introducing a deposit, either have retention of installments, interest, provision, set off of title, reduce the risk of, to basically all this is to reduce the risk of non-payment, and decide on which liabilities you would want to exclude, cap, or accept. So when I say exclusion of liability, you basically can't limit liability caused uh, on account of the death or personal injury, or if there has been a fraud or a fraudulent misrepresentation by you. Uh, be definite about your obligations, keep them specific and identifiable, make it conditional on performance by the counterparty. As a customer, I would like that you agree to everything, but as a supplier, the advice is make it conditional on performance by the counterparty. Reduce absolute obligations, like if, for example, if a clause says that you must do something, m- revise it to that I will use my best endeavor, reasonable endeavor, or a duty to use reasonable care and skill. Now if you're giving warranties, qualify that, limit your rights and duties in time, like lay down specific time intervals within which the customer must accept your services. Now if you have continuing duties, set an expiry date wherever possible. Restrict implied terms. So when I say that, don't leave things open to interpretation. As far as possible, try to be express and don't leave things to be implied. Add termination rights. Especially in your termination clause, you should have the ability to terminate the contract for cause or convenience. And this could be either because of a change of control or a threat to solvency. Indemnity is not a one-way process, it's also a two-way process. So if you're using, for example, the customer provides you with materials, you'll also want an indemnity from the customer stating that the materials that they have provided does not infringe any IPR. And if ever there is an infringement claim that is put on you, that the customer would indemnify you for that entire claim that has come. Now, again, if there is a claim, impose preconditions to claim. Spell out circumstances in which you will not accept liability, such as attempt to do it yourself repairs, use of your product contrary to a clear recommendation, and defects caused by compliance due to the buyer specifications. Seek to exclude risk you cannot afford. Seek to exclude all indirect and consequential loss. So before I move to the position under Indian law, um, so a question that could come to your mind is, why expressly accept any liability? Now, if my contract is silent, would that mean am I not liable? So the general interpretation is, especially is if liability is not expressly excluded, it is considered as you've accepted it. So then you're staring at a indefinite claim or an indefinite damage. I'll elaborate that with an example. It's from daily life. So say you're at the dry cleaners, you give a piece of clothes, which say a Kanjuram sari, which costs 10,000 rupees, you give it for dry cleaning. the dry cleaner destroys, there is a damage that has occurred. Now, if there wasn't a limitation of liability clause, the dry cleaner would have to pay you for the cost of the sari. That would be 10,000. But if they've put in a limitation of liability clause, then they're liable to pay you only for the damage, for the contract price. So that's the maximum limit that they set. So if 1,000 rupees was your dry cleaning cost, so they're limiting their liability for damages to 1,000 rupees. So just an example from daily life that I've given. Now, must you expressly accept liabilities you cannot limit? Like I mentioned, some liabilities cannot be limited in a business to business contract. That would be liability on account of a fraudulent or a dishonest representation, or an injury or death caused due to lack of reasonable care. Now, from an Indian law perspective, is a limitation of liability clause enforceable? Yes, a limitation of liability clause can be enforced in the Indian courts. The Section 74 of the Indian Contract Act covers this. So this brings me to the end of my session. So like Vishnu mentioned in the beginning, we did receive some queries. Now, the queries that came in, they were not just limited to this, but they also were um, on a wide variety of law topics. So I just picked up queries that are relevant to this session. Like if no, I'm open to, we could have another session at any time, to address other queries that you all might have. So if you all have found this useful and would like another session, please feel free to let me know. So some of the queries that came through are, what are the essential clauses in a services contract? So when I'm presuming again that when you say services contract, it would be an IT services agreement. So broadly speaking, so you do have a long form of an agreement and a shortened form. So I would be wrong to say that only ABCD is important and XYZ is not important. But to highlight a few important clauses, your contract should very clearly state the purpose or the scope of your services that you're going to provide. Now, the fees, your payment terms, that should be clearly specified. Then the three clauses that we discussed today: confidentiality, IPR, limitation of liability, that needs to be done. And then as lawyers, we use a terminology called boilerplate clauses. So these are standard clauses that apply to all contracts. So that would cover, basically your force majeure clause, your severability, governing law, dispute resolution, if you want to put in a dispute resolution mechanism, your jurisdiction clause, when can the contract be amended? Um, like now, since we have the supplier sitting in one place and then the customer sitting in another country, so you do have something called as a counterpart clause. You also have your notices that details out to whom the notices needs to be served, and in what circumstances, or what is considered to be an amendment to the contract. So in a nutshell, these are your clauses that would be covered that need to be covered in a contract. So another question that came were, what was software contracts, the do's and don'ts. Okay, so it's hard to prescribe a do's and don'ts list. Like software is something that is is developing every day. And things that go, y'all will be in a better position also to understand that No, it changes very fast. So to prescribe a do's and don'ts list, given the change that happens, it's I think, but I would answer that by putting it this way. When signing up software contracts, be clear on what your agreed scope is. Again, a question that this brings about, no, it's not possible to detail out everything. But then, as far as possible, like for example, when a customer approaches you for a software development, they will come to you with, in most cases, with a proposal document. Try to make that proposal document also a part of your agreement. So so as far as possible, try to be clear on what the agreed scope of your contract is. And we also have a tendency to assume a lot of things. As legal, one uh, one rule of thumb that we follow is never assume. So so that's something that I also suggest that, to follow as a practice. Secondly is consider your risk. More very often, um, because we've taken up the risk in one contract, we tend to follow that in subsequent contact on subsequent contracts. But like I said, not necessarily it will always pay off. So when signing up or agreeing to take up a risk, be sure and understand the risk that you're signing up to. If you feel that that's something outside your scope, you know at the end of the day, weigh the risk that you're taking with the fees that you're charging. So evaluate both options before. So this would be my, the underlying principle that I would do for a software contracts do's and don'ts. So one question that came is the appellate authority for arguments in software contracts. So I'm presuming this again is, you're asking if this contract went into a dispute. If there was a dispute to a software contract, who would then be an appellate authority? Now, this would depend on what your governing law is. It also would depend on whether you've put in place a dispute resolution mechanism, like whether you've agreed to sort out your disputes through arbitration. Another question which came was what was the best way to protect a pre-existing IP used for another software development? So in this case, it would be to use um, license out, like if you are the owner of the pre-existing IP, grant a license to the customer to use that pre-existing IP. And even when you're granting that license, be specific that this IP is meant to be used only for this purpose, and also limit who can use it, like the third party usage to your pre-existing IP. Now, this brings me, so I'll look at the chat boxes to see if there are any questions that have come. In the meantime, if any of you have questions,
So Asha,
Hi, participants. So if you have any questions, I think you can unmute yourself and you can ask directly.
meanwhile, I think there are two questions in the chat window I can see. So the first, I'll read out Asha for you. It says, could you please explain indirect breach? This is a question from Lekha.
okay. So indirect breach, this would come. I'll explain this with an example, and with regard to say use of confidential information. So say the customer has supplied his confidential information to me as a supplier. I have then, for say a particular assignment, I've got my staff, like my consultants involved. I might have a subcontractor also involved. Now, this subcontractor would then breach, even though I might have a confidentiality agreement, he might go and breach this information and disclose that to somebody else who was not supposed to know or have access to the customer's confidential information. So in that case, for the subcontractor's breach, I, as a supplier, in the eyes of the customer, will be held responsible.
Okay, I think that explains it. There is another question from Anup. The question is, could you tell us about the jurisdiction? If the client insists on their location, which is outside of India, is there any way we can safeguard our interests?
That's a good question. So now, especially when you sign with foreign parties, with international parties, they insist on having their country's jurisdiction as the jurisdiction or the governing law. So, as a thumb rule, if you could have any common law country as your as your governing law or a jurisdiction, and if they insist, say for example, if your party is based out of US, and then maybe have the NY law, in such an instance I would also advise that if you have an arbitration clause and then you choose an arbitration center, so that way, say for example, if you choose your center of the seat of arbitration as Singapore, and you're comfortable with say the Singapore arbitration center, so that works in your favor, so rather than opening yourself out to the um, to having to fight it out legally in the courts of a foreign jurisdiction. So that way you get control over it when you choose a neutral um, destination. So that was possible, like if you go in for an arbitration. But yes, arbitration does have its costs associated with it. So that way, these are possible options you can look at.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So if anybody else has any other questions, please unmute and ask.
My name is Sasha. Can you give an example of insurance we can take for safeguarding?
Sure. So in terms of insurance, again, this is a very international concept. It's not as much as developed in India, but you would have your insurance you could take an insurance to cover um, your risk that it comes as a result of your deliverables, and also you could also include a risk to cover. So it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So if you were to go to a common law jurisdiction, you would have insurance that could cover like especially the wide ones where you can't limit. Now in case of negligence or so you could get in. Again, it's a very country specific thing, so you could go in to have a insurance to cover that risk. So I would say one, to cover your scope of work, your deliverables, and thing is where you've also agreeing to your indemnities of say an IPR breach for a third party claim. So those are, it's good to have an insurance if available.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I've seen companies who have taken insurance for specific projects or specific contracts as well. So I think most of the foreign insurance companies provide this insurance. I think both at an organization level and also at a project level, I've seen companies taking insurance.
And to add to Harish's point, like especially like big companies, especially the MNC ones, they also insist in their contract templates that they would specify that a professional liability insurance be taken to the tune of X amount. So that would effectively cover most of the potential damages that could arise.
It's 4 o'clock.
Okay, I think we are almost nearing the time that we had planned for this session. Is there a last question that we can take? Okay, so I think I take that as a no. So thanks to everyone who joined. I think we had recorded this session, so we'll be uploading the recording for everyone to see. And Asha, thanks a lot for the time and effort put into the session. I think we will be sharing your email ID to the membership as well. So if anybody has any questions or is in need of help, they might reach out to you. So once again, thanks a lot for your time, and thanks to everyone who joined.
Thank you, Harish, and thank you all. You all have been a patient audience. And feel free to shoot me an email with any question or query that you have. So thank you once again.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.